A cartel crew was about to kill a mother who broke curfew. Then they saw her husband's photo and begged for mercy. The desert wind carried dust through the streets of El Paso like a whispered warning. Maria Escobar pressed her hand against the dashboard of her aging Honda, watching the clock tick past 9:47 p.m. 13 minutes. She had 13 minutes before the cartel's curfew locked down the entire neighborhood like a prison without walls. Her daughter's medication sat in a white pharmacy bag on the passenger seat, the antibiotics that couldn't wait until morning. Sophia's fever had spiked to 104 degrees, and Maria had made the choice every mother eventually faces: risk everything or watch your child suffer. The streets emptied as darkness fell. Everyone in this part of town knew the rules. The Zetas controlled these 10 blocks with an iron fist disguised as protection. They called it keeping order. They called it safety from rival gangs. But Maria knew the truth. It was control, pure and simple. Stay inside after 10. Don't ask questions. Don't look too closely at the houses where men came and went at odd hours. Don't ever cross them. Before we continue with Maria's story, if you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's see what happens next. Her hands trembled as she turned onto Alameda Avenue. The pharmacy had taken longer than expected. The young clerk had been new, fumbling with the insurance codes while Maria's panic grew with each passing minute. She'd pleaded, explained, almost cried right there at the counter. Finally, prescription in hand, she'd run to her car and driven faster than she should through familiar streets that now felt like enemy territory. The checkpoint appeared without warning. 2 SUVs blocked the intersection, their headlights cutting through the darkness like interrogation lamps. Maria's heart stopped. She thought about reversing, but 3 men were already walking toward her car, their silhouettes unmistakable against the harsh light. They wore black tactical gear, faces partially covered with bandanas. One carried an AR-15 across his chest like it weighed nothing. She rolled down her window because not doing so would be worse. The lead man bent down, his eyes scanning her face, then the interior of her car. He was young, maybe 25, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow that made him look perpetually angry. "You know what time it is?" His voice was flat, emotionless. "I know, I'm sorry, my daughter, she's sick, I had to get her medicine." Maria held up the pharmacy bag, her voice cracking. "She's only 7. Please, I just need to get home." The man took the bag, examined it with suspicion, then tossed it back through the window. "You broke curfew, that's a problem." "I know, but—" "No buts." He straightened, jerking his head toward his companions. "Get out of the car." Terror flooded Maria's system. Stories flashed through her mind, stories everyone in the neighborhood knew but never spoke about out loud. People who disappeared, bodies found in the desert, messages sent through violence. She'd heard the screams some nights, muffled and distant, but impossible to ignore. "Please," she whispered, "my daughter is waiting. She needs this medicine. I'll never do it again, I swear." "Get out of the car," he repeated. Maria's hands shook so violently she could barely unbuckle her seatbelt. She stepped onto the asphalt, her legs barely supporting her weight. The night air felt cold against her skin, despite the lingering desert heat. One of the other men opened her car door wider, searching through the glove compartment under the seats, checking for what? Weapons, drugs, evidence of betrayal? The lead man circled her slowly. "You think the rules don't apply to you? You think you're special?" "No, my daughter. Everyone has problems," he cut her off. "You don't see everyone breaking curfew." The second man emerged from her car holding something. Maria's heart seized. Her wallet. He flipped it open, examining her driver's license, her insurance card, the worn school photos of Sophia with her gap-toothed smile. Then he stopped. His face changed. He pulled out a photograph that Maria kept behind Sophia's picture, a small, creased image she carried everywhere. "Diego," the second man called, his voice tight, "you need to see this." Diego, the lead man, grabbed the wallet impatiently. He studied the photograph under the harsh lights of the SUV. His expression shifted from anger to shock, to something Maria couldn't quite identify. Was it respect? Fear? The AR-15 suddenly seemed to hang differently on his chest, Where did you get this? Diego demanded, but his voice had lost its edge. That's my husband, Maria said quietly. That was my husband. The photograph showed a man in his mid-30s, standing in front of this very neighborhood, his arm around a younger Diego. Both were smiling. It had been taken 7 years ago before everything changed. Diego's hand holding the wallet dropped to his side. Ricardo Escobar was your husband? Yes. The three men exchanged glances. The tension didn't disappear, but it transformed into something else. Uncomfortable recognition, maybe even shame. Diego handed the wallet back to her carefully, almost reverently. We didn't know, he said. We didn't know it was you. Maria clutched the wallet against her chest. He died 3 years ago. Heart attack. We have nothing to do with any of this anymore. I just want to raise my daughter in peace. Ricardo saved my life, Diego said, his voice softer now. I was 17, stupid, got caught in the crossfire between the Sinaloa people and ours. I was bleeding out in an alley. He found me, got me to a doctor, stayed with me all night, told me I could be more than a statistic. He looked at his companions. He looked out for a lot of us. Tried to keep the violence down, keep families safe. The second man nodded. My brother, too. Ricardo talked the bosses out of retaliating against my family when my brother skimmed some money. Said the kid was just stupid, not disloyal. They listened to him. Maria remembered those days. Ricardo had been a lieutenant in the organization, but different from the others. He'd believed in order without unnecessary cruelty, in business without terrorizing the innocent. He'd walked a dangerous line, maintaining respect from the cartel bosses while trying to protect the neighborhood he'd grown up in. It had been exhausting, she knew. She'd watched it eat away at him, the moral compromises, the impossible choices. He got out because of you and Sofia, Diego continued. He told me once that he couldn't keep doing this and look his daughter in the eye. That took more courage than anything else. And then he died anyway, Maria said bitterly. All that stress, all those years, it killed him just the same. Diego looked at the ground. I'm sorry, someone should have looked after you, made sure you were okay. I don't want anything from this life, Maria said firmly. I never did. I just want to raise my daughter away from all of this. The medicine, Diego said suddenly, gesturing to her car. For Sofia. Get home. We'll make sure no one stops you. But Maria didn't move. Something in her shifted. 3 years of struggling alone, of watching her daughter ask why they couldn't afford things other kids had, of working double shifts at the hospital while trying to be present for school events and bedtime stories. 3 years of grief, mixed with anger at Ricardo for leaving them, even though it wasn't his fault, even though she knew he'd done his best. The curfew, she said. It's making people afraid to live. Mrs. Rodriguez down the street, her husband had a stroke last month. She was too scared to call an ambulance after 10 o'clock. He died before morning. Diego shifted uncomfortably. That's not. We're trying to keep order. Keep everyone safe from the other crews. Safe, Maria's voice rose. You're making everyone prisoners. This isn't safety, this is terror. You don't understand the situation. The third man spoke for the first time. The Jalisco cartel has been pushing into our territory. We've had 3 shootouts in the past month. The curfew keeps civilians off the streets so they don't get caught in the crossfire. And what happens when the war is over? Maria challenged. Do you think you'll just give up that control? Ricardo used to tell me about how these things work. Once you have power, you find reasons to keep it. Diego was quiet for a long moment. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of creosote and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. What would you have us do? He finally asked. I don't know, Maria admitted. I'm not naive enough to think you'll just disappear, but maybe there's a way that doesn't involve pointing guns at mothers trying to take care of their sick children. Diego exchanged glances with his companions. Get home, Mrs. Escobar, take care of Sofia, and... He paused, seeming to wrestle with something internally. Ricardo talked about you all the time. How smart you were. How you saw through all the bullshit. He said you could have run this whole operation better than any of us. Despite everything, Maria almost smiled. That sounded like Ricardo, always seeing potential in people, always believing they could be better than they were. I'll talk to some people, Diego continued, about exceptions, medical emergencies. Maybe we can work something out with the hospital, issue passes or something. I can't promise anything, but Ricardo would want us to try. Maria nodded. She got back in her car, her hands still shaking but with adrenaline now rather than pure fear. As she drove away, she watched the checkpoint disappear in her rearview mirror. The pharmacy bag sat on her passenger seat, the antibiotics that had nearly cost her life, that might save her daughters. She arrived home to find Sophia asleep on the couch, where Maria's sister, Carmen, was watching over her. Carmen's eyes went wide when she saw Maria. "Where have you been? It's past 10. Do you know what time?" "I know," Maria said quietly. She went to Sophia, pressed her hand against her daughter's forehead. Still burning hot. She got water, coaxed Sophia awake enough to take the first dose of antibiotics. Her daughter's eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever. "Mama, I'm here, baby, I'm here." After Sophia had taken the medicine and fallen back asleep, Carmen pulled Maria into the kitchen. "What happened out there?" Maria told her about the checkpoint, the men, Diego's recognition of Ricardo's photo. Carmen listened, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. "This is dangerous," Carmen said. "You can't get involved with them again. You promised yourself. You promised Sophia." "I'm not getting involved," Maria insisted, "but I can't just ignore what's happening either. These are our neighbors, our community. Someone has to stand up." "And that someone has to be you?" Carmen's voice rose. Ricardo stood up. "Look what it did to him. The stress, the constant danger. It destroyed his health, Maria. You have Sophia to think about." Maria looked through the doorway at her sleeping daughter. 7 years old, her whole life ahead of her. What kind of life would it be in a neighborhood ruled by fear? "Ricardo tried to change things from the inside," Maria said slowly. "Maybe that was his mistake. Maybe what we need is something different." Over the following weeks, Maria watched the neighborhood carefully. The checkpoint remained, but true to Diego's word, exceptions started appearing. The hospital issued special passes for medical emergencies. People with legitimate night jobs received documentation. It wasn't much, but it was something. More importantly, Maria started talking to people. In the hospital break room, at Sophia's school pickup, in the grocery store, she began having conversations. Quietly at first, then with growing boldness. About their rights, about the difference between safety and oppression, about what it meant to live with dignity. She didn't call for revolution. She wasn't that foolish. But she planted seeds, questions, alternatives. The idea that they didn't have to accept this as the only way. Diego appeared at her door one evening, alone, without his tactical gear. He looked younger without it, more uncertain. "Can we talk?" he asked. Maria let him in but kept the door open. Sophia was at Carmen's house, which was probably for the best. "The bosses are asking questions," Diego said, standing awkwardly in her small living room, "about who's been talking to people, stirring things up." "I'm not stirring anything up," Maria said calmly. "I'm just having conversations." Conversations can be dangerous. More dangerous than dying because you're afraid to go to the hospital at night. Diego ran his hand through his hair. "Look, I get it, I do, but you're putting yourself at risk. These men, they're not all like Ricardo. They don't care about honor or protecting the neighborhood. They care about money and power." "Then why do you work for them?" The question hung in the air between them. Diego looked away. "Because what else is there?" he finally said. "I'm 25 with a record. No high school diploma. This is all I know." "That's not true," Maria said. "Ricardo saw something else in you. That's why he saved your life, not so you could stand at checkpoints threatening mothers. What am I supposed to do, just walk away? I don't know, but I know staying isn't the only option." Diego left without another word. Maria watched him go, wondering if she'd pushed too hard. But she thought about Ricardo, about all those years he'd spent trying to maintain impossible balance, and she knew she couldn't stop now. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Maria was working the late shift at the hospital when she heard the code called. Multiple gunshot victims incoming. Gang violence. She helped prep the trauma rooms, her hands moving automatically through familiar motions, even as dread pooled in her stomach. The victims arrived. 3 young men, barely 18. One was already dead. The other 2 fought for their lives on the operating tables, while Maria assisted the trauma surgeons. Through the chaos of blood and shouted orders, she learned they'd been caught in a shootout near the checkpoint. Wrong place, wrong time. Not even involved in gang activity, just kids trying to get home from their jobs at a late-night restaurant. One of them died on the table. The third survived but would need months of recovery, probably never walk the same again. He kept asking for his mother. He was 17 years old. Maria stepped outside after her shift ended at 6 a.m., the desert sunrise painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She sat on a bench, still wearing her scrubs splattered with someone else's blood, and cried. For that boy. For his mother. For Sophia growing up in this world. For Ricardo and all his failed attempts to make things better. But then she stood up. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. By that evening, 47 people had gathered in the community center's basement. Mothers, fathers, shop owners, teachers, nurses, mechanics, ordinary people who'd lived with fear for too long. Maria stood before them, her voice steady despite the danger she knew she was courting. "I'm not here to tell you to fight the cartel," she began. "I'm not that foolish, and I'm not that brave. But I'm here to say we have to stop accepting that this is our only choice. We have to stop being afraid to talk about it." She told them about the boy who'd died in the hospital, about Mrs. Rodriguez's husband, about all the small ways fear had eaten into their daily lives until they'd forgotten what normal felt like. "My husband tried to change things from inside," she continued. "He did what he could. But maybe real change comes from all of us, together, refusing to be silent, not with violence, not with confrontation, but with persistence, with community. With remembering that we're human beings, not subjects." The meeting ended with no concrete plan, no dramatic declarations, but something had shifted. People left with raised heads, with phone numbers exchanged, with the beginning of connections that could become something stronger. Diego appeared at her car as she was leaving. "You're going to get yourself killed," he said flatly. "Maybe," Maria acknowledged, "but I can't live like this anymore. Afraid, silent." "Is that what you want for your own kids someday?" "I don't." Diego stopped. "I don't know if I'll have kids. What kind of father would I be?" "A better one than you think," Maria said. Ricardo believed that. So do I. Over the next months, small changes rippled through the neighborhood. The community meetings continued, growing larger. People started looking out for each other more actively, sharing information, supporting families affected by violence. Maria coordinated with the hospital to establish a fund for victims' families. Local businesses contributed. Even some of the younger cartel members, the ones who'd known Ricardo, started looking the other way when certain activities happened. It wasn't revolution. The cartel didn't disappear, the violence didn't stop, but the suffocating blanket of fear began to lift just slightly. People started believing they had some agency in their own lives. Diego eventually left. Maria heard about it through the neighborhood grapevine. He'd taken a job in construction in Arizona, left El Paso entirely. She hoped he'd find what he was looking for. Sophia's 8th birthday party was held in the community center, surrounded by neighbors who'd become friends, by a community slowly remembering how to be a community. As Maria watched her daughter blow out the candles, she thought about Ricardo, about sacrifice and legacy, about the long, slow work of change. "What did you wish for, baby?" Maria asked. "Can't tell you or it won't come true," Sophia said solemnly. Then she grinned. "But it's going to be good." That night after the party, Maria stood on her porch watching the neighborhood settle into evening. Lights came on in windows, families gathered for dinner. Somewhere someone was playing music. The curfew still existed, but it felt different now, less like a cage, more like a rule that could be questioned, changed, eventually overcome. She thought about that night when she'd been stopped at the checkpoint, when she'd been certain she was going to die. How a simple photograph had changed everything. How Ricardo's legacy had saved her life and, in a way, had started saving the neighborhood. Maria pulled out her wallet, looked at that creased photograph. Ricardo smiling, young Diego beside him, both of them hopeful in that captured moment before everything got complicated. "Thank you," she whispered to the image, "for everything." Then she put the wallet away and went inside to her daughter, to the life she was building, to the small acts of courage that might eventually add up to something bigger. Not salvation, not paradise, just the possibility of something better. And in this neighborhood, in this life, that was enough. Sophia was already in her pajamas, curled up with a book. She looked up when Maria entered. "Mama, will you read with me?" Maria sat beside her daughter, wrapped her arm around Sophia's small shoulders and began to read. Outside, the desert night settled in. Inside, they were safe. For now, that was everything. 2 years passed like water through sand, slowly, but with undeniable momentum. Maria stood at the same community center where she'd first spoken to those 47 people, but now the room held over 300. The neighborhood had changed in ways both visible and invisible. The checkpoint was gone, dismantled 6 months ago when the Jalisco cartel had finally retreated, when the Zetas had consolidated power and decided that community cooperation was more valuable than fear. Diego called sometimes from Arizona. He was engaged now, working as a foreman, building houses instead of manning checkpoints. In their last conversation, he'd told her he was going to name his first son Ricardo. Sophia was 9, thriving in school. Her fever from that desperate night just a distant memory. She'd started asking questions about her father, not the sanitized version Maria had always told her, but the real story. Who he was, what he did, why he tried to change. Maria answered honestly, age-appropriately, teaching her daughter that people were complicated, that redemption was possible, that legacy mattered. The hospital had hired Maria as a community liaison, connecting medical services with neighborhoods that needed them most. It wasn't much money, but it was meaningful work. She'd helped establish a 24-hour hotline for medical emergencies, secured funding for a mobile clinic, trained volunteers in basic first aid. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose husband had died during the curfew, now volunteered at the community center 3 days a week. She'd told Maria once, tears in her eyes, that helping others was the only thing that made her loss bearable. The neighborhood still had problems. Crime hadn't disappeared. Poverty remained. Young men still faced limited options and dangerous temptations. But something fundamental had shifted. People no longer felt alone. They'd remembered how to be neighbors, how to support each other, how to demand better without demanding the impossible. Maria thought about that night often. How close she'd come to dying over antibiotics. How a photograph had saved her life. How one act of courage, born from desperation and love, had somehow sparked something larger. She didn't consider herself a hero. Heroes existed in movies, in dramatic moments. She was just a mother who'd refused to stay silent, who'd planted seeds and watered them with persistence and hope. As she walked home that evening, Sophia's hand in hers, Maria passed the intersection where the checkpoint used to be. Now it was just a corner with a stop sign and faded crosswalk. Normal, unremarkable, perfect. "Mama," Sophia said, "my teacher asked us what we want to be when we grow up." "What did you say?" "I said I want to help people, like you and Papa did." Maria squeezed her daughter's hand. Ricardo's legacy lived on, not in violence or power, but in this, in a child who believed she could make a difference, in a community that had remembered its strength. In small acts of courage that added up to change. They walked home together as the desert sun set, painting the sky in colors that promised tomorrow. The story wasn't finished. It never would be. But for now, in this moment, they were safe, they were together, and they were free. That was enough.